shortfall. So we had to go through the process again. Now that one was much more painful, but there again, we emerged relatively unscathed, relatively. Okay, so the remaining 0.68 COLA disappeared, but we still had some growth money, we still had money to run programs, we still had money in the categoricals, and ultimately we thought that we were in a position that we could ride out this recession underneath the radar screen. Well, that one lasted until May, February until May, so it's a total of about 3 months. They said, we have to do this again. Now at that time, the legislature and the governor said, well, why don't we ask the people? We'll ask the people to vote on some initiatives and see if the people support us. And so they put together, I mean, it was supposed to be 5, but they ended up putting 6 on the ballot. And frankly, most people didn't understand what they were expected to vote on. I mean, it was so complicated. How many of you remember this Prop 1A? It had to do with the spending cap. Okay, those people who remember, how many of you actually read it? Come on, be honest. Oh, my goodness gracious. Okay, those of you who read it, how many of you understood it? No way. Okay, now this one, I mean, maybe you're guys are, you're a budget guy. I love it. I have a story for you. We had to explain this to our members, what it was. But before explaining to our members, we had to explain to our leaders, because our leaders didn't quite get it. So they said, well, okay, Jonathan, will you write an analysis? Now, my training, please don't shoot me, but I'm a lawyer by training. And so, you know, I'm reading this and reading it and reading it and reading it. Every time I'm reading it, I'm discovering something new. I have a very good friend. He works for the Legislative Counsel's office. Legislative Counsel, that's the legal unit in the legislature that actually puts the bills to legalese. And I called him. I said, hey, I have some questions about Proposition 1A. And he said to me, he goes, hey, did you know I was on the team that wrote it? I'm like, really? No, I did not know that, but that's wonderful because I have some questions. I said, can you explain to me why it says X, Y, Z and not A, B, C? And he said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, take a look at this particular provision. And he said, wow, I didn't know that that even got in there. So I took a step back and I said, now, let me ask you a question. You're one of the guys who drafted this, and you don't even know what's in there? How does anybody actually think that the voting public is going to understand this? And that really was the case. So people are not going to vote for something that they don't understand. There's no way. And so ultimately, the message got sent to Sacramento that it's not our problem, it's your problem. Well, the reality is all of our problems. Here's a situation. This is what people don't understand. We have a California GDP, gross domestic product, that is the 8th largest in the entire world. We used to be 5th, but then France and Italy, you know, they got a little ahead of us, and that's okay. We'll let them do that. They're big countries. We're the 8th largest GDP in the entire world. California legislature does not manage the California GDP. They manage the California budget. It's a little bit different. Because if you take a look at what the shortfall was, what they were telling us in May, relative to the state's GDP, shortfall was really small. Really, really tiny. So why was it then that people came in front of Noreen Evans, who's going to be speaking to you? Incidentally, I can't say enough good things about her, and I want to talk about her in a couple of minutes. But why was it that people were coming in front of her committee and saying, you know what, if you pass these budget cuts, I'm going to lose my kidney dialysis, I'm going to lose my AIDS medication, I'm going to lose my insulin, I'm going to die. That's what people said, right in front of her. I'm going to die. Were they joking? Absolutely not. This was absolutely serious. If the percentage of the budget shortfall of a percentage of GDP was so small, why were people talking about dying? And that the reason is that the California legislature doesn't manage the California GDP. They manage the California budget. The state budget is a statement of values. That's all it is. But the tools that state legislators have in a normal state outside of California are actually very small. They're very few. You can raise taxes, you can cut services. Those are your choices. In Washington, they have many more tools because they're literally managing an economy. So when we heard that there was a big budget shortfall, the state legislature had to make certain decisions. And their decisions could be to raise taxes, which they did in February. They could cut services. They could do a combination thereof. They can do certain things with debt. The problem with debt in a state legislature is that you can only go so far because you really don't have the tools like you have in Washington. They have the ability to print money in Washington. They don't have this in Sacramento. The state's credit rating is in the tank because in the years where the state had actually done well, the state was not using it to repay its debt. Actually, the state was going further into debt. So then when the state was really in trouble, the state did not have enough tools in terms of how to manage debt. And so they had to make some very draconian cuts. Now let's contextualize this. When the voters said that we are not going to accept the legislature and the administration's package of Propositions 1A through 1E, the governor said, okay, I'm going to come to you with a proposed list of cuts, and this is what they're going to be. We're going to start with the big three. That's what we're calling the big three. First thing is, we are going to eliminate CalWorks completely. I know we have CalWorks people here. We're not talking about CalWorks at the community colleges, small. This is the DSS CalWorks, Department of Social Services. This is big. Second thing we're going to eliminate is Healthy Families. That's the health insurance program for low-income children. This was started when Bill Clinton was president. All the governors around the country were fawning over one another to see who was doing best. You remember this when Al Gore ran against George Bush, and he was saying, we got all these kids into S-chip as a Republican governor. In California, Pete Wilson set up what we called it here in this state. We called it Healthy Families. Say, we're going to do a better job than everyone else. This is going to be a real important program for us. It was going to eliminate it. Third program, the big three, Cal Grants. It was just a couple of years ago, the state legislature, Democrats and Republicans together, they made the Cal Grant program an entitlement program. And in fact, they had an anniversary over that legislation because that legislation was considered a model. It was almost like a throwback legislation to when Pat Brown was governor. That we were so proud that we were going to have this program that implemented the master plan's vision of everybody allowed to go to college, to have an affordable college, accessible college experience, whether it be in the community college, in the CSU and the UC, or even in the private universities, that the Cal Grant program was going to allow those students who were entitled to it, whether it be the competitive program or the other program, that you could get a Cal Grant. That was proposed to be eliminated. We would have been the first government in the entire industrialized world to eliminate its safety net, and that was a serious proposal in front of the legislature. A serious proposal. What do you do with that? Let's say you're Noreen Evans, you're the budget chair, and you already understand that taxes, in terms of raising taxes, politically speaking, is going to be very difficult because taxes were raised in the February budget, and more than half of those Republicans who voted for those tax increases were now subject to recall by their own party. And the Republicans fired their leaders in both the Assembly and the Senate for agreeing to a budget deal that included tax increases. And now you're beset against this in this new budget reality. You have to deal with it again. 3 months later, you have to deal with it again. Well, here's the thing. From our vantage point, if you're Noreen Evans and you're saying, what do I do as budget chair? You're waiting for a group to empower me. That's what it is. You're waiting for someone to empower you. And while the Health and Human Services hearing was probably the most dramatic and the most depressing and the most compelling hearing, it wasn't an empowerment hearing. It was a hearing say, if you cut me here, I'm going to die here. That was it. There's nowhere to go with that. So enter the community colleges. And I have to say that SRJC, fabulous. We worked together with Marianne Michaels, who's not here, but I know that most of you know her from the EOPS program. We said, we need you to bring students. We told this to other programs across the state of California.